Bach's Sonatas and Partitas for solo violin, Sonata No. 1, Movement 4, Presto. Around the year 1717, while in Cothen, Germany, Johann Sebastian Bach is believed to have begun composing his sonatas and partitas for solo violin. Bach originally named his collection Sei Solo a Violino senza basso accompagnato, meaning 6 solos for the violin without bass accompaniment. Bach's inspiration for these solos is believed to have come when he was still in Weimar, listening to the partitas of Johann Paul von Westhoff, who was a German violinist and composer that Bach may have known or listened to in as early as 1703. During time in Cothen, Bach was working for Prince Leopold of Anhalt-Cothen as the conductor and director of chamber music. Prince Leopold was a Calvinist, and as such only sang psalms, so Bach focused mainly on his instrumental music, such as the 6 Brandenburg Concerti or the unaccompanied cello suites. Bach is believed to have been challenging himself by writing these sonatas and partitas. Although Bach was reportedly a gifted string player, composing this set of solos gave him a sense of puzzle solving, struggle, and resolution. In the year 1720, his wife Maria Barber passed away at age 36, and this unsettling event most likely impacted many of Bach's compositions for the years following. At least one of these sonatas or partitas could have been as tribute to her, but that has not been confirmed. After Bach's death in 1750, many of his works and manuscripts were lost or forgotten. The manuscripts for these sonatas and partitas were not rediscovered until 1814 in St. Petersburg. They were found in a stack of papers being used to wrap butter. After they were discovered, they were only used for teaching exercises. Joseph Joachim was one of the first violinists reported to perform them, and they were not recorded until 1936. Analysis. This movement can be broken down into an A and B section, and each section repeats twice, creating the AA-BB pattern that we see here. The first major section of this movement is from the beginning of the piece to the D major chord just before the first repeat in measure 53. The piece begins in a G minor. For the first 3 measures, the piece alternates between 1st, 3rd, and 5th scale degrees. Several times in this movement, Bach uses arpeggios or variations of arpeggios to transition to the next phrase, like for instance in measures 4 and 11. He continues to use this strategy throughout the piece. Bach also modulates to a few different keys in the first section, including D major in measures 12 and 13, C major in 14 and 15, and E flat major in 16 and 17. The first section of this piece ends in measure 54 when it modulates to D major. From the chord analysis, we see that Bach ends this section on a 5-1 cadence, while the violinist plays an A major chord, then ending on the D major chord. At this point, the piece repeats, and the A section is played again the exact same. Speaking from a soloist's perspective, there are several difficulties. Overall, one difficulty with the movement is the tempo. In present day, Presto is very fast, but in Bach's day, it would have meant only moderately fast. So the movement may be played faster than Bach intended. However, this movement is the finale to Bach's first sonata, so it is intended to sound upbeat and grand. Another controversial topic of this movement is the timing. The rhythm throughout the piece is straight 16th notes, except for a few 8th notes and chords at the end of each major section. Bach composed the piece in 3/8. However, some soloists will perform this in 6/16 as to give it more of a compound or a triplet feel, so that there are only 2 beats per measure rather than 3. There are a few difficult items within the first section specifically. There are several places where the bowings and slurs are irregular. For example, in measures 31 to 35, the bowing extends to the first beat of the next measure, giving the music a syncopated feel. Section B. Section B of the movement starts right after the repeat of the A section in measure 54. Although this section is longer than the A section, there are many similar qualities between the two with slight variations or changes. Section B begins with the same alternating intervals as Section A, except this time Bach starts in the key of D major. He also uses similar arpeggio transitions as seen at the end of the first phrase. Bach continues his use of syncopated bowings as well. One of the more interesting times he uses this style is in measures 117 to 120. What makes this section unique is that after each slurred section, Bach includes a bowing instruction that is separate but in the same direction as to accent a certain note in the phrase. The climax of the piece occurs in Section B. However, there are 2 places where one could argue that it occurs. The first place would be in measure 87 when the soloist hits a high C on the E string. This is the highest note played in the piece, and the build-up to the note is very climactic. The other place that one could argue to be the climax of the movement is the ending of section B, the first time it is played. Since it is repeated and played the exact same way, there is a build-up to what will be the end of the piece. The piece ends on a 5-1 cadence, but rather than ending on a D major chord like a section A, it ends back in G minor where the piece started. Other than the endings of the two sections, there are no other important cadences. One final aspect that many soloists have touched on is the difficulty of playing these works with the modern violin. Today's violin has a rounded bridge, which makes playing single strings much easier, but sustaining more than two strings at once impossible. Baroque violins, which Bach would have used, have a flat bridge, making it possible to play chords with all four strings. Soloists will sometimes use Baroque violins to perform and record these works. But if done on a modern violin, the chords are played by pulling the bow across the strings from lowest to highest and only sustaining the top two strings. In conclusion, Bach's violin sonatas and partitas are considered to sit at the pinnacle of the violin repertoire. Even though the motives and history behind this work may be mysterious and unknown, the sonatas and partitas have become essential pieces for soloists to learn and perform. Johann Friedrich Reinhardt, an orchestral conductor from Berlin in the early 1800s, reviewed these sonatas and partitas and stated that they were the greatest example in any art form of a master's ability to move with freedom and assurance. These pieces not only show Johann Sebastian Bach's amazing mind as a composer, but also his great talent as a violinist.